This sawmill in western Siberia is said to be responsible for the deaths of thousands of innocent people. On the outside, it looks like any other normal sawmill, complete with professional branding, employing several hundred workers, and surrounded by hundreds of thousands of hectares of beautiful Siberian forest. But on the inside, it holds a very, very dark secret. On paper, this sawmill is owned by two businesswomen who represent the heart of modern Russian entrepreneurship. But in reality, this sawmill represents something far more sinister, and the real beneficiary is said to be this man. Russian General Sergei Surovikin, one of the most brutal men on the planet, who has helped to lead a major part of the Ukraine war, and who has allegedly used this sawmill, which was purchased by his wife through funding provided by the Russian government, to help him extract massive profits from his military campaigns. In early October 2022, Vladimir Putin appointed General Surovikin as the commander of the Russian armed forces in Ukraine, where he would serve a short-lived but terrifying campaign of destruction. During just the first few days of his command, Surovikin obliterated several peaceful Ukrainian cities, bombed central streets that he knew were likely to be full of citizens, and decimated locations such as city squares and parks, all in an attempt to cripple Ukraine's power infrastructure, intentionally leaving millions of innocent Ukrainian civilians without power or running water throughout long periods of the cold winter months. Targeting civilians would be bad enough on its own, but what's even worse is the fact that it's very possible that General Surovikin did it all for the money. Because perhaps the only thing more astonishing than Surovikin's wartime cruelty is his wartime profitability, and his apparent capability to earn money from the loss of human life. What follows is a tale of Russian generals, Russian wars, and Russian money. Three of Vladimir Putin's favorite things, which help to explain a lot of the modern conflicts we see in our world today, once you understand how all of the pieces fit together. So how do Russian generals like Surovikin profit from Putin's wars? And what does Surovikin's sawmill have to do with the deaths of thousands of innocent civilians? To understand it all, we just need to go back a few years and look at Surovikin's actions in Syria, a brutal campaign that resulted in the deaths of over 1,600 civilians at Russian hands, the displacement of over 1.4 million more, and the deposit of 129 million Russian rubles into the bank account of Surovikin's sawmill. All a dirty day's work in the life of a Russian general, acting more like a private hitman, doing the dirty work necessary to secure natural resources for Russian oligarchs. It all started back in 2015, when Syrian President Bashar al-Assad came to Vladimir Putin with a request. Al-Assad had a problem. Since 2011, he had been fighting a civil war in Syria, and things weren't going very well. To turn the tide of war, he wanted Putin to send Russian troops to help fight back against the rebels, and Putin agreed. The question is, why? At first, it seemed that Russia was getting involved to protect al-Assad, because he was one of Putin's few remaining overt allies. And while this may have been true, further analysis reveals that there was something else involved that may have tilted the scales in Putin's favor. Something that would involve a Russian oligarch, a Russian general, a Russian lumber mill, 129 million Russian rubles, and a whole lot of illegal Syrian phosphate. To explain it all, let me introduce you to Russian oligarch Gennady Timchenko, a billionaire with very close ties to Vladimir Putin. Timchenko is the oligarch who is said to have funded the construction of Putin's private palace, an impressive $1.3 billion secret compound on the Black Sea that isn't officially supposed to exist. You could say that Timchenko must have really owed Putin big time to fork over that kind of cash, and incidents like Syria could help explain why. That's because Timchenko profited immensely when Putin decided to get Russian troops involved in the war in Syria, by using the conflict to help him secure purchases of gas processing plants, agricultural contracts, and many other things, including the right to extract Syrian phosphates. Under the terms of the agreement, Timchenko's company would run the businesses and receive 70% of the profits, with the remaining 30% going to the Syrian government, presumably for the right to operate within Syrian territory, with dedicated market share that couldn't be touched by unauthorized competitors. This might have seemed like a sweet deal, and it was. But before he could collect this money, Timchenko had just one small problem. Nothing is free, not even for Russian oligarchs, and he couldn't extract these phosphates or turn a profit until he successfully cleared the phosphate mines of Syrian rebels. Just a small extra incentive for Russia to join the war on the side of the Syrian government. Clearing these Syrian rebels should have seemed like an easy enough task for the Russian military, but it didn't come without risks of counterattacks on supply chains, something which would cut into Timchenko's future profits. And so the objective wasn't simply to clear the mines, but also to break the will of the Syrian people, so that future opposition would be more limited, and Timchenko's maximum profitability could be ensured. You could say that Timchenko needed some muscle, and Vladimir Putin was happy to provide it. Enter General Sergei Surovikin, the war profiteer. The man who will stop at nothing to get the job done, even if it means indiscriminately bombing civilian targets and completely destroying large areas occupied by civilian populations. This man was Vladimir Putin's prime choice to lead the war in Syria. Surovikin was seemingly brought into the conflict to do the dirty job of breaking the will of the Syrian people, much as he would later be brought into the conflict in Ukraine to do the same thing, by bombing the Ukrainian power grid just a few days after his appointment. But unlike Ukraine, where he was removed from his position in disgrace after just 3 months of service, Surovikin left Syria victorious. After a bloody bombing campaign, resulting in over 1,600 civilian casualties and over 1.4 million Syrian citizens displaced from their homes, Surovikin returned home with several new titles such as General Armageddon and the Butcher of Aleppo. He was probably happy with those titles, but what probably made him even more happy was the fact that he apparently then returned home with at least 129 million more Russian rubles in his bank account. That's because after the Syrian phosphate mines were cleared of the rebels, and victory in Syria was declared, the profits began rolling in. Timchenko, the Russian oligarch, was able to profit off of his phosphate mine by transporting the Syrian phosphate over routes protected by Russian troops, onto ships which turned off their tracking beacons in Syria before heading to ports in Cyprus or Turkey. Once there, these ships then turned their tracking beacons back on, registered their cargo as if it were local product, and then continued to sell it into European markets, allowing Timchenko to use his international connections to bypass the international sanctions imposed on Syria's regime, and on him personally. This was, and is, extremely profitable for Timchenko, but like any other business, this one had expenses. There were bills to pay to suppliers and to those who rendered services on their behalf. And one of the recipients of these business expenses turns out to be, you guessed it, none other than General Sergei Surovikin, the Russian general who was responsible for securing the phosphate mines from the hands of the Syrian rebels, and for breaking the will of the Syrian people to resist by displacing over 1 million citizens from their homes. You see, shortly after Syria, interesting deposits began to show up in the bank account of that pesky sawmill back in Siberia. You haven't forgotten about that, have you? The one owned by Surovikin's wife? And these deposits originated from the same company responsible for transporting the Syrian phosphate. This was an odd series of events, because, on the surface, there is nothing to connect a Siberian lumber mill with a Syrian logistics company. The only connection between the two? General Surovikin. In an apparent blood money exchange, the deposits began to trickle in, totaling over 129 million Russian rubles coming in the form of loans from the phosphate transportation company. Loans which were, conveniently, never paid back by Surovikin's sawmill. In short, it seems that Surovikin was willing to order the bombing of civilian targets in Syria in exchange for receiving tips to his front company back home from the Russian oligarch who was the beneficiary of those bombings. This incident is obviously tragic on its own. But what may be even more tragic are the greater implications of these facts, which draw a deep web of connections in an intricate system of corruption, which traces its way all the way back to Vladimir Putin himself, and is likely repeating itself in the current conflict in Ukraine. As we have already mentioned, Surovikin seems to have received these payments in exchange for acting as military muscle for Timchenko's businesses. But remember, Timchenko is the same Russian oligarch who is said to have funded the construction of Putin's private, secret palace at a cost of $1.3 billion, ultimately meaning that Timchenko himself may serve as a sort of front for Vladimir Putin's own wealth which Putin can't officially hold in his own bank account without incurring the wrath of the Russian people, since his official salary is supposed to only be about $120,000. If Surovikin profited off of Putin's war in Syria, there is little question that Putin himself profited even more, which might help explain his willingness to send Russian troops into this foreign conflict, and which raises questions about Putin's motives now in Ukraine, where he has once again invaded some of the most resource-rich regions of the country, and where he has once again installed Surovikin, who once again chose to indiscriminately bomb civilians to try to whittle away their will to fight. The playbook of tyrants is not complicated, and where they have had success in the past, you can be certain that they will be willing to try again.